much stricter than they had been in the past. And prior to the March 11 disaster, the conditions for restart was being set by whether they would fit the standards of NISA, the Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency, which was located within METI. And it was almost taken as a given that they would approve the restart according to their own internal standards. Soon after I shut down the Hamaoka nuclear power plant, METI announced that it was moving towards restarting the Genkai nuclear power plant in Kyushu. And at the time when I asked who had the authority to decide upon the restart of the nuclear power plant, I was told by the METI minister at the time that it was NISA alone that would make this decision or give the approval. However, I did not believe, or I strongly believe, that we should not allow the decision about restart to be left alone only up to NISA, who was not able to prevent the accident at Fukushima. So I put in place temporary standards for restart, or conditions for restart, and there were 4 elements to this. The first being the requirement for local community approval, or local authority approval. The next being the approval of NISA, or soon to be the NRA. Next being stress tests. And the 4th condition being approval by the Prime Minister and 4 central ministers, or 4 ministers of the appropriate ministries at the time. And as a result of these new rules, or standards which were put in place, it meant that except for one specific exception, all of the nuclear power plants which went into regular maintenance after this time could not be restarted because they did not fit these new standards which were put in place. The one exception for this was the Oi nuclear power plant under the Noda cabinet, when the Kansai Electric Company, or KEPCO at the time, was saying that if this was not restarted, there would be very severe electricity shortages, and so this was the one exception. And so following this, because of the difficult conditions which were put in place which were obstructing the restart of the nuclear power plants, the utilities, or the electricity-related industry, and METI started to feel that if I were to continue as Prime Minister, these obstacles would be so much in place that it would be too difficult for them to restart the nuclear power plants, meaning that they went into very strong political or extreme political efforts to end my time as Prime Minister, in other words, to bring me down. I would like to speak some more about this a little later on. Next, I would like to speak about the restart of the Sendai nuclear power plant. So the restart of the Sendai nuclear power plant was a result of the judgment being made that it did meet the conditions which were set in place for restart by the NRA, which was newly established as a law under the DPJ after my time as Prime Minister in regards to new regulation requirements. However, even the chair of the NRA himself, Mr. Tanaka, acknowledges that the NRA does judge whether the nuclear power plant does meet the new regulation or conditions, standards which are being put in place, but it does make no judgment about whether there are sufficient evacuation plans in place for local residents. Within the new guidelines which were set up by the NRA in regards to response in the case of an accident, one of the conditions in place is that the local authorities within 30-kilometer area of the nuclear power plant must put in place evacuation plans for the citizens or residents. However, in the case of the Sendai nuclear power plant, the governor of the Kagoshima prefecture and also the prefectural government or council, as well as the local authorities and the government and the mayor of Satsuma Sendai have given their approval or were in favor of the restart of the nuclear power plant. However, this is not necessarily the case for the heads of the local governments in the other parts which are within this 30-kilometer zone. And the Abe government as well is not taking the full responsibility of, while the initial evacuation is the responsibility of the local government, the long-term evacuation responsibility, of course, lies with the national government. However, the Abe administration is not taking the responsibility for this. And so I believe that restarting the nuclear power plants amidst this situation where the responsibility in regards to evacuation is still unclear is something which, from a legal perspective as well, according to the laws in place for response in case of a nuclear disaster, is something which is unacceptable. For example, in the United States, our NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, has the responsibility of actually checking and verifying evacuation plans for residents in nearby areas and giving approval about whether these plans are sufficient or not as part of their responsibility as a regulatory body. However, in Japan, this is not the case. As I mentioned, due to my efforts of calling for the shutdown of the Hamaoka nuclear power plant and also increasing in the strictness of the regulations and the standards for restart of the nuclear power plants, since immediately after this there were very severe efforts to bring me down as a Prime Minister. And at the front line of this in terms of the politicians involved was the current Prime Minister, Mr. Abe. And for example, just around 2 weeks after I called for the shutdown of the Hamaoka nuclear power plant on May 20 of 2011, Mr. Abe, who was then a member of the Diet, called in his Mail magazine or his newsletter sent out via the internet. He mentioned in an article there that on March 12, 2011, I, being the Prime Minister at the time, had called for the injection of ocean water into the reactor 1 at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant to be stopped. And so he therefore said that I, as Prime Minister, was responsible for the disaster response being delayed so much and that I should step down immediately. And 4 days later, in his Mail magazine newsletter, which was sent out on May 24, he called for a notice of lack of or no confidence vote to be made against me as Prime Minister. And on June the 2nd, actually, giving the reason that my response as Prime Minister was not sufficient or was had been wrong, the LDP did in fact submit such a notice. And within the Democratic Party, or the DPJ, there were, of course, various movements in response to this, and we were able to have a majority vote against this proposal. However, of course, the political situation continued, and with this as one of the large reasons in the background, I ended my time as Prime Minister in September of that year. However, Diet member at the time, Mr. Abe, the comment he made in that I had called for the water injection to be stopped on March 12th was based on completely false information. There was no evidence and no such case of this happening. And TEPCO itself does show, within their reports announcements, shows that the injection of water was continuing throughout this entire time, and I did not make any such request for this to be stopped. And since 2 years ago, I am actually within the courts having a lawsuit against Prime Minister Abe for defamation in regards to this. And I am calling for, of course, these claims made by Prime Minister Abe were kept on his homepage, on his Mail magazine online, without being deleted for the entire time after this. So the two things I have been calling for first is for that to be deleted from the internet, and second, for a public apology. However, Prime Minister Abe has consistently refused both of these requests. However, after much time had passed, actually, 2 years after the event, without making any contact either to the courts or to me, Prime Minister Abe actually unilaterally deleted this information from his homepage without making any comment about this deletion. And so, of course, this means that, well, he was, in a way, acknowledging that the information which was being posted there had not been correct. However, he has not responded to my request for a public apology in regards to this. And I expect that a judgment in regards to this suit will be made within this year, but I just wanted to share an update on this situation with you all today. And within the final remaining time of my presentation today, I would like to speak about something with a little more hope. I firmly believe that by the end of this century, not only will nuclear power plants throughout the world also be no longer, but we will also no longer be using fossil fuels by this time. Of course, this year in Japan, we had a very hot summer, but despite the fact, or at the peak time when people were using air conditioners and so on, when demand was at its highest, we had no electricity shortage. And one of the significant reasons for this is because of the expansion of solar power generation in Japan. Solar power, of course, generates the most during the daytime when the sun is out, which means that it is able to cover the demand at the peak time. And I think this was very much part of the reason why we were able to go throughout this summer without electricity shortages. In the United States and Europe also, we see the number of nuclear power plants decreasing, and at the same time rapid increase in generation through renewable energy such as wind, solar and biomass. China is the country which is at the moment having the greatest increase in nuclear power plants. However, even in such a place, even in China, the generation of electricity through nuclear power plants is actually being overdone, or there is more generation through renewable energies now, through wind. We are also seeing great global developments and also new innovations in regards to efficient use of electricity and energy throughout the world. And so I believe that Japan also has both the technology and also the capacity for such industries, for such developments in renewables as well. So I really believe that it is very important for us now not to go backwards towards nuclear power once again, but to have a forward shift towards renewable energies. And this would be for the benefit of the Japanese economy and also the safety of the Japanese people. And I also believe that even if we look just at the financial aspects of nuclear power, in the end, it does not make sense. So hereby I will end my initial remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan, and thanks to our interpreter, Mary Joyce. So let's start the Q&A session now. First, the members of the press. Any questions?
My name is Crowell from Nuclear Intelligence Weekly. So that I can get this accurate, would you please tell us again what it is that Mr. Abe accused you of on his website?
I have copies of his blog here, actually, the
3日分あり
original
ます。
text, so I'm happy to give that to you in Japanese. So I have just delivered a copy of the actual original text by Prime Minister Abe. To put it very simply, the main point which was included is that on March the 12th, so the day after the disaster, from the initial beginning of the injection of water from the ocean at 7:04 p.m., he claims that I became very angry, saying, I have not heard about that being done. You need to stop it straight away, is the claim being made by Mr. Abe of what I, as Prime Minister, had said. However, in reality, and this is also acknowledged by TEPCO, this did not happen, and the plant manager has also acknowledged that from the beginning of the injection of water, it was not stopped once throughout the time after that. It was consistently being injected after this. So there is no evidence at all of me making a request or of it actually being stopped. There is also many other points which he is including in the article, but that's the main point which I would like to share. And the day after the newsletter or the online newsletter was sent out, on the top page of the Yomiuri Shimbun, the newspaper, the next day, so on May 21st, the top headline of the article saying, because of the Prime Minister's wish, the water injection was stopped. And this is the example of the Sankei newspaper of the following day, so of May 21 as well. And it is not the top article, but it is on the top page of the Sankei of that day. And the headline reads, Prime Minister extremely angry interrupts the injection of water. And so within this comment, or within the article, both in the Yomiuri and the Sankei, they are reporting directly from Prime Minister Abe's newsletter, and also with his comments included as well, saying the same thing again. However, just 1 week after, on May 27th, this is an example of the Asahi Shimbun, the newspaper. However, all of the other newspapers did make the same reporting following an announcement by TEPCO saying that the injection of water had continued without interruption throughout that whole time. So this was just 1 week later. It was shown that actually there was no request and there was no interruption of the water injection. And this was across the board in all of the newspapers at that time.
Yes, I'm sure we are all curious about the outcome of the lawsuit by a former Prime Minister against the current Prime Minister. So,
アソシエイトメンバーの塩村と申します。2点あります。
My name is Shiobara. I am an associate member here at the club, and I have two questions. First of all, for former Prime Minister Kan, in regards to the restart of nuclear power plants, if you were to name a particular nuclear power plant which definitely should be not restarted, which would this be, and the reason for that? And the second, which is on a completely different question, but in regards to the reshuffling or the rearrangement of the opposition party, I would like to ask, what are your plans within DPJ for this, and what are the steps in line there? Thank you. In regards to the first question, of course, in Japan, for close to the past 2 years, there was not a single nuclear power plant operating throughout the country. All of the plants had been stopped. And yet we did not see any significant minus or damage being brought upon either the Japanese economy or the everyday life of the Japanese people within this time as well. Therefore, I believe that all of the nuclear plants should not be restarted, and they should instead be gradually moved towards decommissioning. The biggest reason of this, well, of course, there is the risk of disaster, but not only this, there is also the issue of spent fuel. Here in Japan, we still have not come to a decision about how to deal with the issue of spent fuel in the long term as well. And thus, I believe that restarting the nuclear power plants without figuring out what to do with this spent fuel is also definitely not the best thing to do when we consider what is needed for the future as well. So from the perspective of what is best for Japan's future and also best for its economy and also the safety of its people, I believe that restart should not occur. Also, we have not seen any significant economic minuses, shall we say, from this, and we will not. And actually, it would be the opposite. If we were able to make such a decision, then we could end the wasteful investment which is now being put into the nuclear power plant industry and instead shift this towards investment into renewable energies and so on. And this would actually be, in the long term, a much better economic decision also. And in regards to the second question about the opposition, I believe that the most important point at the moment is not so much looking at the situation within the existing opposition parties in Japan, but whether it is possible to have collaboration which goes beyond this into creating kind of with a new movement. For example, whether there could really be the capacity to overcome these current existing situations and create a new party, for example, which would go beyond this. And as some of you may be aware, before entering the political sphere or before becoming a politician myself, I was involved in various civil society level activities in Japan. And this led to the involvement in the creation of a new political party. Especially now we are seeing the situation in the public or here in Japan surrounding the security bills or so-called war bills. And here we are seeing, for example, the emergence of SEALs, the young teenagers or 20-something-year-olds movement, which has not maybe traditionally been participating or active in politics, but now being very active and very vocal as well. Or also other groups which had not traditionally been very vocal or active in such activities, such as young mothers, for example, or women joining these activities as well. I believe when we look at the fact that these people who are being involved is not coming from, shall we say, the traditional movements of the labor unions or students groups coming from within various sects and so on. We are really seeing a much broader level of people within Japan being engaged in politics. And so the most important question now, I believe, when we are looking at what kind of opposition should take place in Japan is whether these new movements and this new energy will be able to give birth to some kind of a new step within politics in Japan as well, and whether it will be possible to work together with such movements, with such developments taking place in Japan to become a center to form a real strong opposition as, for example, a new party in that respect.
My name is Kurt Sieber. I'm an associate member. I'd like to come back on your last point about the cost of nuclear power. I had the chance to see the movie Tell the Prime Minister the other day. And also, I will have the pleasure to hear you speak again at the OAG on September 16. I was one of the first ones to have a solar system on top of my house. And I sold the electricity to TEPCO at 48 yen per kilowatt. Also, the system was very heavily subsidized by the central government, Tokyo Metropolitan Government, and Setagayaku. This was a very good thing, but it gave in the world and in Japan the mistaken impression that solar power is and renewables are very expensive. The mistaken impression. The long-term strategy in the United States, where I have several connections, is that solar and wind power will come to about 5 or 6 cents in mega systems in the future. Now, if you take the cost,
in the interest of time,
I'm coming to the question, don't worry. On the other side, nuclear power, we have the cost and the possibility of final storage. We have the possibility of the cost of decommissioning. If you add all those, even not considering the accidents, the cost of nuclear power, if you really calculate it in economical terms, is a lot higher than what renewable energies will be in the future. So I'm greatly supporting your view that at the end of the 21st century, nuclear power will naturally disappear because it is too expensive. However, by that time we will not be alive. So what are we going to do in the meantime? And I think the original policy, which and I would like to hear about from you about that, is the original policy of the DPJ was to phase out nuclear energy in the 1930s, latest by 2040. I'm Swiss, and also in Germany, nuclear power is being phased out. But it is phased out about over a reasonable period of time, whatever that period will be. So I have one problem with your policy, and there I would like to hear more from you is, what are we going to do until 2030 or 2040? Is it really a good idea to phase out totally immediately? Because most of the fossil fuels which are being used, particularly in Japan, it's fossil fuels and it's coal, which has a much more important destruction of environment and pollution. So please tell us what you think about the next 15 to 25 years. Thank you.
So when you talk about 48 cents, you must have made your solar panels at a very good time, I believe. So was your initial investment covered within about 5 to 6 years? In regards to the feed-in tariff, or as a result of this, we are seeing great increases in the amount of solar power being generated. There is also perhaps an image that comes along with this in some ways about increasing cost of electricity as well. And there is, of course, various advertising efforts and so on in place to put forward this image. However, I would like to say that this image is not necessarily accurate. Until the feed-in tariff was introduced, there were various subsidies in place for the introduction of such efforts as well. However, it was not clear at the time whether that would actually be returned or not, which meant that as a result there was not a significant increase in the amount of renewables being generated. And within the tariff setting within the FIT system, it is being put in place, or the tariffs are being set as a way to make certain that the installation fees can be fully recovered within this, or almost in a way to guarantee this. And through this being included as part of the FIT, this has meant that there is a great increase in the number of people who have chosen to be involved or engage in solar. And within, of course, the example of the 48 yen as well, this is not guaranteed for a permanent price setting as well. There is, for within, 10 and 20 years and so on, deadlines being put as part of this also. And this year, for example, it has actually decreased to 29 yen per kilowatt. And so what is the reason for this decrease in cost, shall we say? Well, of course, one of the main points is that the installation costs are much less than they had been previously as well. Therefore, the amount that needs to be guaranteed to recover these costs required for installation is much less than it had been in the past. And of course, the FIT is in a way an incentive for the initial 10 or 20 years to promote the introduction of solar, to promote the introduction of such energies as well. We see, for example, Germany introduced such a system around 20 years ago and has shown great success within this policy. And I believe we are also seeing this here in Japan as well since the introduction. And this is leading to a great increase in the amount of solar, for example. I believe if we look another 10 to 20 years from now, we might even see that the costs of solar will actually decrease so much that it may be around the same level or even cheaper than natural gas. And when it comes to this point, there will actually be, no need anymore for such a system, such as the FIT, to continue to be in place at that time. However, at the moment, we are seeing great success as a result of this being introduced. And in regards to the question of until when we should continue to use nuclear power plants, or what the short-term plan for that would be. If we look at the example of Germany, the decision has been made to have 0 nuclear power plants by 2020, and currently I believe there are 9 operating in Germany. And immediately after the disaster here in Japan, I was also concerned about whether if all of the nuclear power plants were immediately stopped, whether there would be blackouts and shortages. However, we have seen for approximately 2 years in Japan there was no nuclear power plants operating, and even now it is only the one at the Sendai nuclear power plant. And yet within this time we have not seen any significant negative effect on economic activities here. And also when we consider the issues of spent fuel and storage, I am also sharing the same opinion that you mentioned, that in fact nuclear power is not cheaper than other forms of energy, but actually much more expensive when we include these within the factor. And if we look at the examples, for example, of Spain, where we see renewable energy is filling about 40% of the energy being generated, for example, or the goals which are being put in place in Germany to have 80% of energy, including heat or thermal through renewable energies by the year 2050. I believe that if Japan were to put in place the same kind of goal as Germany, it would be very much possible for Japan to meet such a goal by this year. So, for example, to have 80% renewables by the year 2050. So this really shows, and I very firmly believe, that there is no need to continue utilizing nuclear power.
And I heard that also Mr. Khan started generating solar energy in his house. So I wish to ask, can you confirm that you are selling energy to the TEPCO? And don't you feel a sense of vindication in this selling energy to TEPCO?
Actually, around 2 years ago, I am living together with my mother, actually, and we rebuilt our house, first of all, to make it, as we say, barrier-free for her, and also upon my wishes, also making sure it was a home which would consume very little energy, so very energy-efficient home as well, so including not only introduction of solar, but also ways to generate through gas even within our own home. And so if I calculate, for example, the last year or so, the 12 months of last year as well. So as I mentioned, I'm living together with my mother who's 94 years old, so quite elderly, meaning that during the winter, for example, she is using the floor heating and utilizing quite a lot of electricity within the home. If we calculate or put together the gas and also the electricity, including what we are buying from TEPCO, I'm actually selling around the same amount back to TEPCO through what we have generated in our home as well. So I can say they're actually now a very good customer to me.
Hello, Joël Legendre from French Radio and Television, RTL, TV5. At the end of the year, in December, we're going to have the climate conference in Paris. And until 2014, Japan has been, because of the stopping of the nuclear plants and the import of a lot of gas and oil, one of the major emitters after the US and China. The third one, actually, until 2014. So what is your expectation about this conference in New York, in Paris? Do you think that if bureaucrats, government officials, NGOs and so on are very interested by this conference, it doesn't seem to be the same for the companies chairman and firms who don't have really much interest into targeting their activities with limitations in a way to not to pollute too much. What do you think about this conference, and what do you think Japan should do on this issue?
In regards to COP, or the conference coming up, I believe that the change in a way of the stance of both the United States and China in a more positive direction is something that I'm paying great attention to at the moment. And so if we compare to, for example, the time of the conference in Kyoto, we saw both of these countries being not active at all in regards to making decreases in CO2 emissions. However, we compare this to now, and we see that both of these countries are putting forward their stance in coming closer to the global consensus of reductions in CO2 emissions as well within this century. In the case of Japan, during the Hatoyama administration, we did make some quite ambitious goals. However, since the Fukushima disaster, there has not been much of a, shall we say, forward-looking perspective in regards to this, including the current administration. And so, unfortunately, we are seeing within the administration, and even to an extent or in a certain way amongst the population in Japan as well, the belief that, well, if we are not to be operating nuclear power plants at the moment, it is unavoidable that we will have somewhat of a temporary increase in CO2 emissions for the due term. And if we look, for example, at the goals which the Japanese government has set in regards to its decrease in emissions, actually the standard which they are using to compare to this is 2013. So this is at the time when Japan's emissions of CO2 were at their peak as a result of the aftermath of the disaster as well. So, and the goals which are being set are only a very small decrease from the 2013 levels, which is meaning that this is a very, well, passive or negative stance which we are seeing from the current administration. When we look at the traditional concepts or fundamental concepts of economic growth, it was long held that in order to pursue, in order to implement economic growth, you do need to have significant consumption of energy. However, I believe this is very much or fundamentally a 20th century kind of way of looking at the situation. If we look now at concepts of economic growth, we need to be looking at economic growth while at the same time having significant decreases in the amount of energy being consumed as well. And we are really seeing